The objective for this lesson is I can use area models to represent fractions, decimals, and mixed numbers. So we've been learning how to write fractions as decimals and decimals as fractions, and to write mixed numbers both in fraction form and decimal form. So for instance, reminder, if I have a number like a decimal written like that, all right, we learned how to write that as a fraction. So how would you write 0.07 as a fraction? That's right, you would write 7 over 100, because you'd write whatever the number is. In this case it's 0.7, which we can write as 7, and then wherever the number, whatever place value the number ends in, that's the place value you put as your denominator in your fraction. So this number ends in the hundredths place, so it's 7 over 100. All right. We also are writing fractions and decimals as mixed numbers too. So in this case, I'll write the fraction first. So fraction mixed number, that is. So let me get rid of the decimal there. Don't know why I did that. So for instance, if we have right, that mixed number 3 9/10, to write that as a decimal, how would I write 3 9/10 as a decimal? That's right, you'd write your whole number, which is always on the left of the decimal point, and then 9/10, right? So we write our numerator down and make sure that it ends in the tenths place, which it does. So 3.9. All right, so basically what we're going to do is what we've been learning. All we're going to do this time is we're going to look at area models and write down what those area models are representing, the number that they represent. So for instance, right here, this very fancy drawing I did here, this area model, what you would do is you would look at it and you would write that, whatever the area model is showing, you'd write that number as a decimal and a fraction. So it's basically just counting. So easiest way to do is write the fraction first. So if you count up the total number of squares there, and you probably should be able to figure that out just by looking at it, because you've seen this for a few years now, you know there's 100 total squares. So that's your denominator, and so then you just count how many are shaded in. So it's 3 out of 100. Now it's just a matter of, how do I write 3/100 as a decimal? So again, remember, I write the number 3, but I have to make sure my 3 ends in the hundredths place. So to have my 3 end in the hundredths place, I'd have to put a 0 in front of it in the tenths place. And so that's how I would use this area model to write the number. So on this one here, I want you to look at this area model, and I want you to tell me to write the fraction that's being shown in the area model, and then write that fraction in decimal form. So go ahead and use this area model and write the fraction that it's showing and the decimal. Okay. So again, it's just counting. So you see all those little squares. As soon as you see that and you don't see 10 rows, you see all the little squares, you pretty much know it's over 100, that there's 100 squares. So you just count the shaded squares in that are shaded in, and hopefully you got 6. So there's your fraction. Now again, how do I write 6 over 100 as a decimal? Hopefully you put your decimal point. You wrote the number 6. But remember, the 6 has to end in the hundredths place, so you have to put a 0 in the tenths place. All right, so next thing you would have to do in this lesson, and the last thing, is you're going to look at area models and write mixed numbers for them in both decimal and fraction form. So same thing. Anytime you have more than one area model, you know you're going to have a number greater than 1, right? Again, you can think of it as pizza or something else. So in this area model, right, I have 100 squares and all of them are shaded in. So I don't have to write 100 over 100. I can just write one whole because the whole thing is shaded. So there's my whole number. Then you look over here at this part of the area model, and again, you know there's 100 squares shaded in. I'm sorry, 100 total squares. And then you'd count the number of squares shaded in, which would be 20. And so your answer would be 1 and 20 hundredths. Another possible answer for this is, if you really understand this, some of you might have noticed, you can also, since all the squares in this row and this row were shaded in, right? 20 hundredths is the same as 2 tenths because the one whole row, 2 whole rows out of 10 whole rows, or columns I should say, are shaded in. All right, so now I'm going to have you do that. I want you to look at this problem down here, and I want you to use the area model and write the number that's being shown, okay, as a mixed number using a fraction, and then write it as a decimal over here. Okay, so for the mixed number, so you have one whole area model shaded in, so there's your one, your whole number, and you want to figure out the fraction part. So in this case, you have two options. You have 10, 20, 30, 40 that are shaded in out of 100. So that's a possible answer. Or if you noticed that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 whole columns shaded in out of 10 columns, right? This answer could also be written 1 and 4 tenths. So either one of that's correct and that's correct. All right. And then all you have to do is whichever way you wrote the fraction mixed number, you would just write that as a decimal. So again, whole number is to the left of the decimal, and these are actually the same thing, right? If you did 40 over 100, you would just put the 0 on the end, and if you did 1 and 4 tenths, you just take the 0 off. But 1 and 40 hundredths is the exact same as 1 and 4 tenths, all right? So those are the kind of problems you're going to be doing on your independent practice today. Go back and rewatch the video as many times as you need to if this was confusing.